Right. Thanks very much everyone for joining today. I'm Kevin, and today we're going to show you a demo of how you can use Codemagic to build React Native apps. I'm going to start with a couple of slides and then we'll move on to the demo. So Codemagic is a CI/CD mainly used by mobile developers, but because we work with YAML files, some of our customers test, build and ship their web apps with our software as well. We use Codemagic as our own CI and build our products with it. Codemagic itself is a fully managed service, and all of our builds are done using macOS virtual machines. It's up to us to update the software on those machines so you don't have to manage your own server instances like you do with systems like Jenkins. The virtual machine base image is shared between all Codemagic users, but we also offer dedicated hosts if you need some specific software installed. And if you want to reach out to us, you can do that on the business page on our website if you want to request it. A lot of people know us for building Flutter or CI/CD for Flutter apps, but you can also use Codemagic as CI/CD for apps written in other languages. Native iOS, Android apps written in Java or Kotlin, React Native, which we're going to be talking about tonight, Cordova, Ionic, Xamarin, for example. So in this demo, I'm going to be showing React Native. So who actually uses Codemagic? Well, we support a whole range of different users, ranging from beginners, single developers, small teams to large enterprise teams. And we support customers who create internal enterprise apps and developers who create white label apps for their customers, which is a little bit more complicated, but you're more than willing to give it a try. But if you're a business customer and want help with that, please feel free to reach out to us again on our business page. Getting help for our product, you can turn to the Slack community where we try to help people as much as possible. You can access the documentation, which we should be looking at this evening in this presentation. There's the blog, which has lots of useful articles. And if you are on a business plan, then you get dedicated business support, both with onboarding and ongoing. Okay, so let's dive into building a React Native application and deploying it with Codemagic. So first of all, you're going to have to sign up for the product if you haven't already. You could do that by going to the Codemagic website and then clicking on the Start button or Sign Up button. And from there, you can choose to authenticate with the system using GitHub, Bitbucket, or GitLab. Now, that doesn't restrict you to accessing repositories from other sources. So if you joined with Bitbucket, you can quite easily get your GitHub repositories or GitLab repositories. So I've already signed up with GitHub, so I'm going to just click on this button and it will authenticate me and log me into the system. If you do want to access repositories which are self-hosted, or you don't have repositories on the account that you've signed up with, you can use this functionality up here, which is the add app from custom source. Now, this allows you to enter in a repository URL, and if it's a private repository, you can set up SSH keys to access that repository securely. That just gives you another way of adding repositories from different sources. Now, in my view, I've got access to a whole host of different repositories. As I mentioned in the slides at the beginning, we build our own software using Codemagic, and you can see some of the apps that we're building on a regular basis. For myself, I'm going to be building a React Native app that I've checked into my own GitHub account. So I'm just going to do a quick search for it, and it's come up with this app here. Now, the first step is to set up a build. So I'll click on the button and it will take me to the select a workflow screen. So we're looking at building a React Native application. So I'm going to choose React Native from the continuous integration workflows screen here. And then that will take me into the initial setup. Now, what we need to do to start with is create what's called a Codemagic YAML configuration file. And this file will go into the root of the repository or the branches that we want to use the continuous integration with. So we download the file, which will give us this template file that you see here. And from there, we're going to start building up the workflow. So I'm going to copy that over to the root of the repository. And I've opened up this already in Visual Studio Code. And you can see I've got this Codemagic YAML. Now, important things to note here is getting help with how to use this file. So the first and most important thing would be to click on the link here and then go and visit the documentation page, where you can see instructions that explain some of the commands that are being used, how to set up specific things for iOS, talking about testing, code signing and publishing. And then there's some full examples for both iOS and for Android, along with information about how to increment your build numbers, for example. So we're just going to go in and add some commands, or just see if we can get this building by checking it into the repository. So because at the minute I don't want to be working with the iOS part of this file, I'm going to just remove that from the initial template. And then I'm just probably going to get rid of these artifacts that are related to iOS as well. I'm then going to save the document. I'll leave these environment variables here for the minute. When we add some new ones, I'll replace those. And once we've saved the document, what we need to do is check that in to the repository. So I've got an alias set up that should allow me to just give some comments and check in that file. No, we're not going to do it like that. So we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. So I'm going to add all the file changes. I'm going to, oops, my keyboard's not responding. Git commit -m, add the YAML, and then I'm going to push that up to the repository. Now, once that's checked in, we can go back to the web interface, and then we can check for the configuration file. Now, I should be working on my develop branch at the moment, so we're going to go into here and choose Start First Build. I'm going to change this to my develop branch, and then it's picked up the workflow that we want to work with. So within the YAML file, it's split up into specific workflows. So for example, I could have a specific one for Android and then add another one beneath for iOS, which I'll show an example of shortly. But let's get this building for the first time by just doing a manual build. So we click the build button, and this is going to take us to the build overview screen. From here, you can see some important information, such as the number of the build that we're building. So this is the first one. So the index will be 1, the branch, the commit number, how long it's taken so far, and that we're working from a Codemagic YAML configuration file. Over on the right-hand side, we can see the steps that's taking place. So it's preparing the virtual machine that we're going to be building on, which is always a clean state to start with, apart from any pre-installed software that helps with building, such as Android SDK or Xcode, for example. And you can expand these sections to see what's happening, and obviously troubleshoot. If anything goes wrong, you can inspect these logs to get help. Another important feature is the ability to access the remote machine. So for example, if we want to SSH into the machine, we can bring up a terminal, paste in the command, and then we should have access to the machine where we can list files and navigate or run commands to troubleshoot any of our builds. I'm just going to close that for now and remove that down to there. Okay, so that's going to just continue building. I don't anticipate any problems with that, so we'll just let that run for a moment while it's building, and we'll come back to see what's happened in a moment. So what we need to think about next is, obviously, when we check in code, we want to be able to have the builds trigger automatically. So if we go into the settings icon up here, one of the most important things to do will be to create a webhook which will add webhooks into the Git repository that will allow us to trigger builds on pull requests, on pushes or tag creation, for example. So I'm going to click that button and we can see we've got a success message here saying that we've actually added the hook successfully. And then what we need to do to make use of that is add some triggers. So I'm going to add in a triggering section that will allow us to monitor changes on the develop branch. And typically we'll look for those. We'll put this in just beneath the environment variables section. So because it's YAML, you need to be aware of indentation. I've got a plugin enabled there that just gives me some warnings if I get things completely wrong. So that gives you a clue of how to put the code in properly. So that will be listening for changes on the develop branch for pushes, new tags, and pull requests. Now, what we're aiming to do next is actually set up a release build. So with an Android application, we're going to have to use a key store and use that to sign the build. So I'm going to add those using encrypted variables. So if I just add them into the environment variable section here, you'll see I've got quite a few here. So I've got one for Firebase, which I'm using for distribution, but the key store values are here. Now, I got these values by using the web interface and then entering in my string values. So if I had a secret password, this will just give us an encrypted value that can then be copy pasted from this interface directly into your file. With a file such as the key store itself, you will drag this into the interface here and it will actually encrypt the file, but then give us a base64 encoded version of that file. When you're working with files later on in your scripts, then files need to be decoded, whereas strings don't need to be decoded. Okay, so let's add some more steps into our script. Let's just check that our build is happily spinning away before we do that. Okay, so good news is that we've got a successful build here. So for example, we can see that the build was fine, everything's completed as we'd expect, and it's added our artifacts down here on the left-hand side. So these artifacts will be available to you in your build list whenever you need them. And if you add things like obfuscation symbols or debugging symbols for iOS builds, then you can access them quite easily from here. So let's continue building out the steps for the Android app. So with a React Native application, there's a few steps that we have to take. So one of them would be to install the NPM or dependencies that are listed in your package.json down here. So I'm going to just use a slightly different syntax that makes it a bit clearer to see in the interface. So we use this format here where we can see the name, and this will show in the interface, and this is the script that's going to be run. I then want to use a script, or I'm just going to update the one we've got here that sets the location of the Android SDK in a Android /local properties file. So we know where the SDK is when we're building. Again, I'm just going to format this correctly. Then we need to use the key store that we set up. So I'm going to add in another script here that's going to decode the environment variable that we've got the key store in, and then that's going to write it to the temp folder keystore.keystore. And you can see here that it's provided passwords that are provided here as environment variables. So next section will be to just reformat this release and build section. So we've got the changing into the Android directory here, and then running gradle w assemble release. Now, one more thing that I'd like to do as well is get this distributed to my test users. Now, for this demonstration, I'm going to be using Firebase app distribution. So this allows you to sort of distribute your applications very quickly without having to wait for review, both for Android and for iOS apps. So let's just move that back there. Now you can get documentation on how to use this. You have to set up a Google Play, a Firebase account, and then you can use the CLI tools to upload your applications directly from this CI build. So there's some requirements for this, which I've put a link to the documentation here, and we'll make this available to people when we send the video out, but I'm going to just click that, and that will take us to the documentation on how to go through distributing to your testers and what all these parameters are that I'm using in the script here. There's also a way to generate a Firebase token that you can use from the CI machine, and that's what I'm using in the script, or the environment variable is the actual token value that I got from running the command. But essentially what it does is upload the APK in this case. It will provide release notes to the end users, so that can either be a text file or just a simple string like this. And then I've set up a group of users on the Google Play Store, sorry, the Firebase app distribution, to send an email out to let them know that it's ready. On Android, there's an application where you can download the release from directly and then immediately install it. Okay, so last bit is I'm just going to add in an extra publishing step, which will be to send an email to myself, which will let me know when the build is ready. Now, other things you can do in the publishing step would be to send a notification to a Slack channel, actually publish to the Google Play Store and go through either a internal track or alpha, or actually go through a full publishing phase at that point. But this should be enough to get the application built and then sent up to Firebase app distribution and then send me an email. So I'm going to quickly add the files, commit them, the changes, and then push that up to the server. Now, if my triggers are working correctly, this should start a build off for us. If I've done something wrong, we'll soon find out. So let's have a look in here. It's all looking good. Build for my CM React Native app has started, and we should hopefully see that in the console shortly. There we go. So it's preparing the build machine, then we can monitor the steps there. Now, in the interest of time, I'm just going to let that run and then just quickly show you how a typical iOS workflow would look like. So here's one I prepared earlier. I'm just going to take the whole thing and paste it into the YAML file. So what I should be able to do is just pop it down at the end here. Make sure I'm in line with the other workflow name, which is React Native. And maybe we just need to go over there, try it there. Yeah, okay. So this would be the iOS workflow. So for example, in this one, I'm specifying build duration. You can go up to about 120 minutes, but if your build's taking longer than 2 hours, then there's probably something wrong. So you shouldn't really have any limit. If you're using a business plan, you can access Mac Pro as your instance type, which are typically 50% faster than the standard Mac Minis that we use. Again, I've got Firebase tokens. I've got references to my Xcode workspace, and you can either do manual signing or automatic code signing. And again, your best friend here will be the documentation. So you can go to the distribution documentation and find out all about how to configure this properly so it will work for you, either automatic or a manual deployment. So I'm going to go back into this file here. I'm using App Store Connect API, and you'd need to go into your App Store Connect console and set up a key to allow access using the App Store Connect API, and download the key that it provides for you. Keep it in a safe place because it's a one-time only download. And in this case, I've actually encrypted the key using the utility on the Codemagic page. Other things to note here is the setting the version of Xcode. I've just said to use the latest and the default version of CocoaPods. This is very much similar to the Android build. So we're installing the npm dependencies. We're installing our CocoaPods, so we change into the iOS directory and run that command there. We then initialize the keychain on the machine, which handles all the certificates and provisioning profiles for us. These bits that I've commented out are actually the manual code signing. So if you provided your own certificate and provisioning profile, you would have to actually decode these and access them on the machine itself. In this part of the script, I would be using one of the Codemagic CLI utilities called App Store Connect, which simplifies the whole process of scripting out these kinds of commands. It's open source, so if you want to look on GitHub at how we do this using Python, then you're more than welcome to do this. But in this particular command, I just need to pass in the bundle ID of the app that I'm working with. And in this case, because I'm using Firebase app distribution, I'm just providing it as an iOS, an ad hoc build, as opposed to an App Store build, which I'd probably use if I was publishing to TestFlight. Other things to note here would be incrementing build numbers. So for an Xcode build, we can use the AGV tool utility, which will allow us to take the environment variable called build number. And if you do a search in our documentation, you can find out what environment variables are available for you there. Talking of build numbers and versioning, one thing I kind of skipped over with the Android build versioning would be the fact that you need to increment your build numbers as you go along. So for example, I would use this build number variable that's available on the build machine, and then just use that as my version code. So each time the index increments, then it will apply that version code to the app. And there's some various other sort of signing things that I've done here to say if this is a CI build, then use the passwords in the environment variables. If not, I've got a local environment variable set up that will use my own key store that I've got in my key folder down here. Okay, so let's just go back to the YAML file here and just see what else you need to be aware of. So there's commands for building the app, and again, in terms of uploading to Firebase app distribution, here's the equivalent of doing it for an iOS device. It's practically the same as the Android, just you probably notice in the app ID the word is iOS instead of Android. This will then take the IPA that we've built as an artifact along with any log files or debug symbols. If you wanted to go one step further, you could actually comment out the app distribution, change the type back to App Store, and then use the App Store Connect Publishing, where you provide your Apple ID and app-specific password to do the publishing. So one last thing, just to hopefully wrap up. If we go and look at our application, we've got a successful distribution using Firebase. Now let's have a look here and see if we've got anything in the builds. So all being well, we should have build number 2 with 2 people invited of my release notes there's internal Android test release, and that will send an email out to users to download the binary and test it on the device. Okay, so we are probably running short of time, so I think at this point the next thing would be to ask if anybody has any questions and go from there.
Kevin, can you explain the difference between manual code signing for iOS and automatic code signing?
So with the automatic code signing, you don't actually have to go and create things like the bundle ID up in the Apple developer portal or create your certificates manually in the same place, or provisioning profiles. So it's actually the automatic way does this for you. And it's probably the recommended way, I believe now, that Apple tells people to actually sign their application. So it makes the whole process a lot easier for end users and people distributing apps. Is there any more questions, Martin, there?
Udo was wondering about SonarQube plugin. SonarQube is currently available to integrate, I think, but we don't have a plugin for it at this time. If you need some help, I think best place to get it is to send us an email, and maybe Kevin can prepare some proof of concept application